countdown is underway. Ohio State launching the defend the shoe strategy this year. Everything gets a little bit of an upgrade. Modernizing the tradition, stuff to look forward to, stuff to judge and critique and try to get fans off their butts. Maybe in a new way, not the old-fashioned way, which is just play well. But they're not waiting. They're moving forward. And they'll probably slap a sponsor on a lot of stuff to try to help monetize it a little bit. The man who's covered them for a long time very well, our friend Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North, covering college football. My man, how you been?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Outstanding. Read into the quarterback battle for me. You've covered enough of these. What vibe are you getting?
Yeah, the interesting word to me is comfort right now, that they're talking about these guys being uncomfortable on purpose, like they're putting them in tough spots. The competition is doing that for them. And then I think it's in pursuit of them, the winner, being comfortable when it matters. But, I think they like this stuff. And now here's the thing, right? We've all been through enough of these quarterback battles. Ryan Day was talking about the idea of, guys looking over their shoulder and that kind of thing when you're in a competition. I felt like with J.T. Barrett and Cardale Jones in 2015, Urban Meyer talked about that a lot, and it didn't work out well. I think when we got to the season, those guys played like they were looking over their shoulder. Cardale did, I think, especially when he played 3 series and got benched in week 2 or whatever it was. So, I'm okay. I think looking over your shoulder in August is fine. I don't think it's a way to play in September. I still think it's going to be saying, but, man, it's just it feels like it cracks the door 1% every day. I'm like, could it be Lincoln Keenholz? Could it be Lincoln Keenholz? And then the thing that's interesting about this is down the road, I think Tavian St. Clair hovers over all of this, not for 2025, but for down the line. And then it's well, how does down the line affect right now? Maybe not at all, maybe some, I don't know. But it's pretty interesting, but I don't think fans should be worried yet. I don't think there's any reason to be worried. But, man, it's really interesting.
Yeah, no doubt. Doug, when we were listening to Coach Day's presser after practice today, he went down the road of the offensive line a little bit and talked about Austin Seerveld and the great offseason that he's had. And it sounded like, Doug, he's made maybe a move to left tackle for a little bit. I don't know if that's an experiment through our practice or if that's where they want him to be long term. What were your thoughts on that when it came to the offensive line, but specifically Austin and where he is right now?
I think again, I've been through enough of these guys. I can still remember when James Laurinaitis was an outside linebacker, and then it was all of a sudden he was the middle linebacker. It was oh, okay, that's what we're doing here. And it's yeah, that was a good move. So this, remember a couple of years ago, DeJuan Jones, and all of a sudden it's okay, we're shuffling around the offensive line to make this work. And sometimes guys start on the left and move to the other side. That I think you always have to be on alert, even into August, for them to make moves to get their best guys in the best positions on the field. And I think I'd rather them do that than be well, this is it, we're locked in. The continued search, I think all this stuff, guys, is a search from desperation or is a search from strength. And it feels like maybe when you talk about Austin Seerveld, it's my gosh, this guy is a baller. That it's not oh, what are we going to do? We don't have a left tackle. So if that's what it's in service of, then okay. And I'm talking with my good friend and co-host here, Bill Landis, just the idea of they might have some really interesting depth in that offensive line room. Maybe these discussions do all this stuff. Does it come from strength or weakness? Does it come from the chance to get better or from desperation? I think both with quarterback and offensive line, it feels like it's coming from strength.
Doug, what's more likely in your mind? That they're actually playing for a championship again, that they make that game, or that something weird happens and they're struggling to avoid 3 losses?
Yeah, last year was both. Something weird happened and they won the national championship. So it's they're not mutually exclusive, right? So, we certainly have talked about that. I think the depth in the Big Ten is maybe the best I've ever seen it in my 20 years of being around the Big Ten. And so that's just a reality that I think Ohio State fans understand that, but you might have an idea in your head of what playing Illinois, what playing Washington, what playing Minnesota means. And I would just say don't underestimate those teams. And then you throw in the idea of, okay, the Michigan thing is real. Penn State is among the best teams in the country. Texas is ranked number 1. I probably, given that choice, would say maybe slightly more better chance if it gets a little loose with a lot of guys who haven't played before. But again, the point I would say to that is I think maybe they could be 9-2 and struggling to avoid a third loss and still get to the national championship game, because it's really two different things, and we're all still wrapping our head around that reality.
What's the feel over there, Doug, when it comes to the defense and those guys getting used to a new defensive coordinator and Matt Patricia? Clearly they lost a ton of talent, but there's obviously a lot of talent in the building. But that it's always kind of a big, not big red flag, but a minor red flag for me when you're changing coordinators. How do you think those guys are feeling with that adjustment so far throughout the process?
Yeah, I do think probably two things that matter the most there. And it took me a while to sort of come around on this, but I do believe Ryan Day on this standpoint. One, right, Matt Patricia does what the personnel does best, so he'll fit the defense to that. But also, Tim Walton's still there. James Laurinaitis is still there. Larry Johnson is still there. Matt Guerrero is still. It's not a new defensive side of the ball. It's a new guy calling it. And there's a lot of guys who haven't had chances to start yet there. And Ryan Day made it very clear with Patricia hire that was a big consideration. He wanted to keep his other defensive coaches. And so I do think we have to be cognizant when we talk about a new defensive coordinator that sometimes new defensive coordinator means new defensive staff, and that is not the case here. And so those linebackers know what James Laurinaitis wants. The linemen know what Larry Johnson wants. The corners know what Tim Walton wants. So I think for a lot of them, like, it maybe isn't that different, and then it's like, what's the call? But what we do every day in our room hasn't changed.
Doug Lesmerises with us, Kings of the North, covering college football in Ohio State. It looks like they dodged a bullet with Edric Houston, right? But I just want to get your feeling on the defensive line as a whole. Do you feel right now it is the unit that at least has the most eyeballs on it as far as not knowing what it can be yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, and like one guy can really matter. You know that you always know they probably want to go 5 or 6 deep at defensive tackle. So that Edric Houston is not a long-term injury, and Ryan Day was talking today of 48 hours or so he should be back doing what he needs to do. I can't even remember how many springs ago it was. It might have been like spring of 23 maybe. I can still just remember being at practice and watching Kenyatta Jackson bend off the edge and being like, man, I like how that looks. So I think it is very possible that Kenyatta Jackson is a rare thing at Ohio State, which is a guy who doesn't have the chance to pop until year 4. I think that's possible, but I just think Ohio State is constantly measured against itself. There's nobody really, you can measure them against Georgia, you can measure them against Oregon or whatever, but really it's about the Ohio State standard. I think every fan listening to this understands, okay, you lose the 4 guys you lost up front last year, you're taking a step back. But how can you gain that elsewhere? And then, by the way, could Kenyatta Jackson be out there looking like Vernon Golston? Yeah, I think that's on the table. I think that guy has a chance to be a rare dude.
Doug, in your opinion, if I remove Jeremiah and Carnell Tate off the board as the guys that are going to be go-to pass catchers, when you've been around practice and looked at the things that they've stacked up this offseason on offense, like Max Clare, Brandon Ennis, maybe somebody else, who do you think needs to be that reliable third option on offense when we talk about catching the rock?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clearly Max Clare. I think you could he's clearly one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten, maybe the best tight end in the Big Ten, and he's among the best tight ends in the country. And I think maybe the best way to think about the Emeka Ibuka replacement in the slot is to think of it as Max Clare, because it really is, in the end, it's less about body type and it's more about who can work the middle of the field, who can find space against man coverage and zone coverage, who can run option routes, who can make tough catches with guys around him and give the quarterback a good target. And Emeka Ibuka was like a beast in the middle of, doing that kind of thing. And Max Clare has a chance to be, I think, as important to this offense as anybody not named Jeremiah Smith. So I think, and that's not news to anybody. We know what a high-profile transfer that was. But I think when you look at the way they've used the tight end in years past, like the receiver rooms have been so good, I think we might see a tight end-like season that we haven't seen in a while.
Final 10 seconds, Doug. Where were you picking in your Heisman draft, and who did you take?
I had the fourth pick. I took Cade Klubnik, and I took Jeremiah Love as my first two picks. So Jeremiah Smith was gone by the time that I picked, but I think Jeremiah Love at Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is going to be good, and it's maybe not going to be quarterback driven. They have a young QB too, so I would tell people to watch out for him.
All right, my man. Good stuff. Thanks for making time for us, Doug. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks, fellas.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North. Wow, Jeremiah Smith was gone in the first three picks in a quarterback-driven award.
That doesn't surprise me because I think if he balls out at a very high clip, right, I think it'll have the feel of him uplifting
No
a
doubt.
young quarterback than the other way this year. So I think he'll get a little bit of that love.
We come back. We'll tell